A few years ago, I started working on a theme framework. This is something that a lot of theme developers do, particularly if you are writing themes from scratch and use a lot of the same code. At a certain point, it just makes sense to build a framework for a theme that you can reuse for every project. I wanted to build my own framework because I don't like using other people's code. At least when it's my own code, I know how I write, I know how I organize my HTML, what tricks I use again and again. I don't have to learn someone else's code and style. The first iteration of this theme framework was called Blueprint. At the time, I was also using a 960 pixel CSS grid framework by the same name, so calling it Blueprint was really just an uninspired name that referenced the CSS framework it was built with. It wasn't anything special, it was just a skeleton of a theme with stuff that I tended to include in other themes I built, including an options page with some basic options that could be built onto. After a while, though, I decided I wanted to make my framework a bit more robust and integrate data validation and sanitization and the WordPress settings API, which I wasn't using in Blueprint. This theme would be an actual theme, which could be used standalone with some options to change stuff, but could also be used as a parent theme or a theme framework to build stuff onto. So Blueprint evolved into a theme which I eventually submitted to the WordPress themes repository called Museum Core. One of the ideas behind Museum Core was that it would be the parent theme behind the themes I sell on museumthemes.com, that those would be rewritten as child themes of Core. This way I'd have one theme, available in the WordPress.org repository, which would be eligible to receive automatic updates. The individual themes wouldn't need as many updates, at least in theory, and the core theme, the framework and guts behind all the child themes, could receive the automatic updates. Reality doesn't always work the way we imagine it, and a lot of that never actually happened. But Core did get added to the WordPress repository. It's been downloaded, people have used it, and I used it as the parent theme of several new themes which were ported over from Blogger templates that I had developed. But eventually, as I got new client projects and new theme frameworks started appearing, I stopped using Core as my theme framework and instead started using a framework called Underscores. I also started playing with Twitter Bootstrap, which was starting to become a big deal, and would expand my 960 pixel grid to an 1140 responsive grid. I started using Bootstrap so much, mostly because of the built-in mobile support, that I stopped using Core entirely, and instead was trying to find ways to use Bootstrap in everything. Eventually, though, I decided this was silly. I was running into the same problems that led me to create a theme framework to begin with, which was wanting to use the same code over and over for different themes and different projects. But instead of using my own framework, I was using underscores and bootstraps and having to track down the tricks and hacks I used for a project that led me to add dynamic breadcrumbs, and the thing I did on another project for archive pages. Enough was enough. It was time to do a massive update to Core. The 2.0 update for Museum Core integrated Bootstrap 3 and was a massive overhaul to the foundation of the theme. This course is going to cover a lot of the territory that I had to navigate when I was rebuilding Museum Core with Bootstrap 3. It will cover some specific tricks that aren't natively supported or supported easily with WordPress that Bootstrap 3 uses, and it will cover some things that Bootstrap 3 doesn't support that is expected in most WordPress themes. Plugging Bootstrap 3 into an existing theme was more than just swapping out some CSS classes, but I'll be showing you how to do it from scratch rather than trying to insert it into something that already exists. In retrospect, I wouldn't actually recommend doing it that way, since there were so many fundamental differences and every file in the theme was changed in one way or another when I updated Core. When I started the Museum Core update, it was after Bootstrap 3 was released, and at the time, I didn't realize what a fundamental difference Bootstrap 3 was as compared to Bootstrap 2, which I had been using before. Bootstrap 3 eschews the previous assumption for responsive design in which you just add a bunch of media queries at the end of the CSS file to accommodate various different devices. Handling responsive design this way requires that those smaller devices still load all that CSS that doesn't necessarily apply to those devices. Bootstrap 3 uses a mobile-first approach, using the media queries to target smaller devices first and work up to the larger devices. This allows those devices with smaller screens to load and display the parts that they need to load without having to load the entire style sheet in order to display properly. While I was working on the Museum Core update, I had also just learned about an initiative called the ThemeHook Alliance from a WordCamp presentation by Mike Hansen, a core WordPress developer and theme developer. The ThemeHook Alliance attempts to formalize a series of hooks to be added to WordPress themes that can be used by plugin developers to execute their code at specific times in the markup. This can be really helpful. For example, I have a plugin called Notifications. The idea behind this plugin is to use a very simple post type to display a message at the top of the page. However, my plugin requires that someone add a piece of code to their header.php file in a particular place in order to display the notification, since there isn't a hook that can be used to display something right after the HTML tag opens in the theme. This is what the ThemeHook Alliance is trying to solve. WordPress core developers have said that if there is enough momentum toward adding hooks in these places in the code, they will do it, but because the hooks really need to be in the themes, it is really something for themes to solve. But in order for something like the problem I described, where a plugin relies on a particular hook to be present in a theme to function properly, themes as a whole need to support a canonical set of functions to use to handle this, rather than using a bunch of different functions depending on the theme. So as I was developing my Museum Core update, I decided to integrate these ThemeHook Alliance hooks so Museum Core would support any plugins that use these functions automatically, without requiring the user to change anything, including the plugin I wrote, Notifications. This module will focus on these three concepts. We'll talk about theme frameworks, what they are, and how they are different from other WordPress themes. I'll talk about Bootstrap 3 and why you might want to use Bootstrap 3 in a WordPress theme. And I'll talk more about the ThemeHook Alliance and how you would use it in your themes.